Hello, everyone. Thank you all so much for joining. We'll probably have a couple of more join us here in a few minutes. So um, we'll take a minute or two before we get started. I did want to go ahead and talk a little bit about the Metropolitan Housing Coalition. I see a lot of familiar faces and a lot of new faces. My name is Sarah Pierce. I am the program coordinator for the Metropolitan Housing Coalition's EveryHome program. This is a program that we started around 2 years ago. Um, at this point, like 3 days ago, it would have been our 2 year anniversary. And this program was built to build on the housing affordability conversation. So at Metropolitan Housing Coalition, we believe that everybody has access, or everybody should have access to affordable housing and affordable utilities. And we are expanding that work through our EveryHome program. We do this through community education, and working at the local and state level to make sure that people have access to an affordable home and an affordable energy and water bill. So today, we are doing our annual legislative session recap, where we are looking at all of the energy and housing bills, and if they passed, if they didn't pass, and what that means for the future of affordable housing and affordable utilities. And today I have a few speakers with me. I have Ashley Wilms, the Executive Director of the Kentucky Resources Council, Lane Boldman, the Executive Director of the Kentucky Conservation Committee, and George Eklund, the Director of Education and Advocacy at the Coalition for the Homeless. So I just wanted to take a moment and thank you all so much for hopping on. We had Ashley and Lane last year to talk to us about some energy bills. And this year we will have George join us and talk about what happened in housing. So, um, just a little housekeeping. We will have a Q&A afterwards. So if you have any questions in the meantime, feel free to put them in the chat. This webinar will also be recorded and made available on our YouTube afterwards. So with that being said, we can go ahead and get started. I don't know if Ashley, Lane, or George, if you want to give a little more introduction to yourselves, or we can jump right into the bills.
I'd say let's jump right in.
Okay. All right, so we are going to start with the energy bills. There were a lot of energy bills this session in relation to affordability, nuclear, reworking the PSC. So I wanted to go over a few of these bills and see what was in the bill, why is that important, if it did or didn't pass, and what that means for the future of energy affordability in the state of Kentucky.
Yeah, well, I'm happy to start with House Bill 367, which is one that did not pass this session. HB 367 would have restricted the charges that investor-owned electric utilities can recover from customers by limiting the allowable costs, those costs that can be recovered from customers, to those directly and exclusively related to providing electric service and approved by the PSC, the Kentucky Public Service Commission. In practice, this would have prohibited utilities from collecting certain fees and taxes, but also including those supporting demand side management, voluntary energy assistance, and some compliance related programs. So at first glance, this might have looked like a consumer protection bill, but it actually could have undermined programs that help keep energy affordable, especially for seniors, fixed income households, and others struggling to pay utility bills. So this is one that I think is a good thing that it did not pass. Lane?
Yeah, and I'm going to talk about a few bills here as a group because we had a collective effort the last several years, actually. We've been in a conversation about how to get the Public Service Commission and the legislature and the governor's office to take action on utility affordability. 43 states have legal protections to prevent utility disconnections during dangerously cold weather, and the impacts are increasing. So Kentucky Conservation Committee, Kentucky Resources Council, Metropolitan Housing Coalition, Appalachian Citizens Law Center, and several other allies that are part of a coalition called Kentuckians for Energy Democracy, worked on getting comprehensive legislation written to deal with utility disconnections, and we've been working on this for several sessions now. The bill that we put most of our money on this session was a bipartisan bill filed by Representatives Whitten and Wilner, which was House Bill 377. But along with this, we also had a slightly more conservative version of a bill filed in the Senate, which was Senate Bill 88, and Senate Bill 62, which complemented 88. And what those bills would have done, which would have 62 would have prohibited evictions of residential tenants during extreme weather conditions. And then the comprehensive House Bill 377 would have had a whole slew of provisions. It would have created winter and summer temperature standards for disconnection service. It would allow a resumption of disconnection only after 72-hour period during which the temperature standard is exceeded. It would have established a process for a certificate of need for persons who are at risk. It would have gotten people back into the programs if they had trouble paying their bills, in other words. So it wasn't a way to absolve people of paying their bills. It was a way to make sure that people weren't being put in danger, but that we could get them into the programs that were necessary. But for whatever reason, none of these bills passed, and none of them even got a hearing, which was very, very frustrating for the coalitions we work on. And we've already just had some discussions for how to tackle this again for next year. But the biggest thing we run into is having concrete examples for people to tell their stories. And that's kind of tough because if you've had your utilities connected, you may not. I mean, it's embarrassing. It's frustrating, and you may not be in a situation where you really want your story to be so public. But I am going to put in the chat for that some resources that our coalitions have put together. If you know of people that might want to tell a story about disconnections, so that we have concrete examples to take to lawmakers or take to the governor's office, that is what we need the most. So I'm putting in three resources for different ways you could tell your story or help us collect them, even if you want to do it anonymously or you don't want to attach a name to it. Because the thing we kept getting asked by lawmakers was, bring us the people that are directly impacted. Well, we don't really want to put people at risk either. So, but we do need to address the problem because last year electric utilities shut off service for had an 87% increase of disconnections statewide. And that's huge, and that's only going to get worse. So we're trying now to kind of pull out some of these stats to where people understand the problem better. And we'll talk more about, how the budget was being addressed for some of these issues. But we made a plea to the governor for more funding for low-income housing assistance, and then we certainly talked to lawmakers about the strategies of the bills. And I don't think it's about that. I think it's fundamentally people are not understanding how big a need it is out there, and we'll just leave it at that.
Thanks, Lane. Well, I'll move on to House Bill 398, which deals with who pays for the costs of retiring fossil fuel plants and when. And when we refer to the retirement of a power plant, it means to not just turn it off, but to permanently shut it down and take it off the grid. Over the past few years, the legislature has made it much harder for utilities to retire coal and gas plants. There's now a presumption against retiring those plants, and utilities have to get approval from the Public Service Commission before they can do so. So since then, the PSC has generally said utilities can't start charging customers for retirement costs until that closure is actually approved. Well, this bill changes that. HB 398 allows utilities to start recovering those costs from ratepayers, things like decommissioning, remaining depreciation, before the retirement is approved. there is a tension here. So, on one hand, allowing earlier cost recovery may make it easier for utilities to retire aging and uneconomic fossil fuel plants sooner. So that could be a benefit for some customers. On the other hand, under the current legal framework, there's no guarantee that retirements will be approved or that they'll actually happen. So in the meantime, customers are going to be paying for something that, may or may not happen, which is why we opposed this bill because we feel like it does put more financial burden and risk on ratepayers without clear assurance of the outcome. Next, I'll just mention the budget. House Bill 500 is the legislature's two-year executive branch budget. It directs roughly 32 billion in state spending across fiscal years 2026 through 2028. And it included across the board cuts to many agencies. We did see some targeted investments in conservation districts, energy initiatives, and I think Lane's going to mention this, including nuclear. Um, the Energy and Environment Cabinet received continued funding, but with a broader context of constrained agency resources. And I'm sure that's the case for other agencies that deal with housing, although we didn't look at that very closely. Maybe George can touch on that more. Um, but I do want to also note HB 900 supplements the budget by directing approximately 1.7 billion from the Budget Reserve Trust towards certain one-time investments, which include water and sewer infrastructure, economic development, and local projects. So I think that it's more a project-based allocation versus a long-term systematic investment. But that may have some benefits for housing affordability in there.
So, so I'll just add that what is causing some of the strain for the utilities is through data centers. You probably have been hearing a lot about data centers lately. This is something we've actually been talking about for quite a while, but it's really gotten the public's attention in the last 2 years, particularly. But I've got some statistics that data centers, and I think this varies by the research, but data centers will account for up to 12% of all U.S. electricity consumption by 2028. It's a huge impact. And it's taken a while for the public to kind of understand how much this now may impact their electricity bills in states like Virginia, where was ground zero for data centers. Their utility bills have certainly gone up. A lot of these other areas where these facilities are getting established now, the public is becoming very, very aware of the impact it can be on their utility bills. So during the 2025 legislative session and before that, lawmakers had passed several tax breaks for data centers. Um, and I think they didn't quite understand just how much of an impact this would have for the utilities, but they got tax breaks on the data centers themselves, on equipment, and this has led to just a wealth of proposals coming into the state. We've had reports of proposals or discussions of projects in Mason County, Oldham County, Jefferson, Mercer, Hancock, Pulaski, Simpson, you name it. So this session, we had a couple of bills that were comprehensive, trying to get their arms around the problems and get some better regulation around data centers. And those were House Bill 544, which was Adam Moore, and House Bill 593, which is Josh Bray. But we also actually had a couple of smaller bills, four more smaller bills that all were trying to tackle different aspects of data centers, such as water use, noise, zoning. And so this is quite a lot of bills on one subject all at once. But the main bills for Adam Moore, he was focused on ensuring that data centers pay incremental costs for new power generation to prevent rate hikes, so protect the ratepayers. Josh Bray's bill, we're getting some bleed through. Josh Bray's bill was prohibiting subsidization of data centers by by allowing other customers to not have to cross subsidize across electric utilities, and it required data centers to prepay all of their infrastructure costs. So, this is a pretty strong effort that I saw from several lawmakers. We thought that some of these might go through. We thought at least the Moore bill or the Bray bill might get through, and Bray's bill made it pretty far. But the Senate leadership decided that this was not going to happen this session. So none of these bills, again, passed. And we found that very frustrating because they all are tackling different issues on data centers. At the same time, the public is really demanding this. They are tired of these things being sprung upon them. One of the bills was trying to prohibit non-disclosure agreements because that has been used in a lot of these communities where the public is trying to find out more and people are under contract not to reveal things. So this is going to be a continuing issue, but at the moment, I think we can blame the Senate leadership for the fact that none of these made it to the finish line. And I'm going to hand this off to Ashley for talking about SB 8.
Yep. Thanks, Lane. I just want to add that I agree with Lane, and on the data center issues, and really, we paid close attention to this session too, and really the Kentucky's need to have clear statewide standards. And we've been really focusing on the siting standards. So we recommend bringing data centers and related non-utility transmission infrastructure within the jurisdiction of the Electric Generation and Transmission Siting Board, which is and Bray's bill touched on that. Just ensuring that these large scale facilities are evaluated for local impacts, compatibility with surrounding communities. I am going to drop in the chat. KRC has a data center model ordinance we've been trying to get communities to pass, just so that local communities do have more control until hopefully we do see some statewide standards. I know Mercer County is considering an ordinance tonight that has some of these provisions, but we don't think goes far enough in any way. So. The last energy bill I'm going to talk about is Senate Bill 8. So this is the bill that really restructures the Kentucky Public Service Commission. It changes the member and eligibility requirements for those PSC commissioners. And as a reminder, the PSC is charged with regulating more than 1,100 utilities across the state. It is definitely under-resourced. The bill expands, which did pass, I should add. It expands the PSC from 3 to 5 members, and it expands the Kentucky State Board on Electric Generation and Transmission Siting from 7 to 9 members. It also established certain qualifications for PSC commissioners, among other things. One good piece of news: the governor is going to continue to make all appointments to the commission. At some point, one of the I forgot if it was a bill substitute or amendment gave the state auditor the authority to appoint commissioners. So we were glad to see that go away. And this was one that it was a lot of, I think, back and forth on this bill in terms of the amendments and bill substitutes and reconciliations. But the version that ultimately passed is more narrowly focuses on that restructuring and expansion of the PSC. So it gives the PSC greater administrative independence, including control over its personnel and procurement. But it does also change how cases are decided. So moving forward, the chair of the commission will now assign 3 commissioners, or at least 3 commissioners, to hear and decide a matter with no more than 2 from the same political party. So that's going to be interesting to see how that sort of shakes out. Or the chair may assign all 5 commissioners at his or her discretion. We generally supported this bill after so many bad provisions were removed. And I think expansion of the PSC is a good thing, given its workload and longstanding resource constraints. But one of the things we really thought was missing here was more investment in the PSC's technical staff. So those are the ones that are really diving into the cases and reading all the modeling and doing so much of the legwork. And so, I think that's an issue that should have been addressed that wasn't. I do also want to mention, the final bill did not change anything in regards to intervention in commission proceedings, which was the big fight that Lane and Sarah and that we had this session. Sarah, do you want to go ahead and quickly touch on that?
Yeah, so the Metropolitan Housing Coalition is a part of something called the Joint Interveners, which is represented by the Kentucky Resources Council and Earth Justice. It includes the Metropolitan Housing Coalition, Kentucky Solar Energy Society, Kentuckians for the Commonwealth, and the Mountain Association. And we intervene on Public Service Commission cases on behalf of low and fixed income folks, at least from the MHC side, so that we can ensure that rates remain affordable and fair. And the original provision of Senate Bill 8, I believe the way that it was written is that it would prevent the joint interveners from intervening on Public Service Commission cases. And of course, that means that there wouldn't be any representation for just the regular Kentucky citizen, those who are living in low income households, and we saw this as an issue, and I know that Ashley and Tony and all kinds of different organizations rallied together and went to the legislators and explained how much of an issue this would be because we need representation for the community that we serve. And so that provision, I believe, was changed, and we are still able to intervene, which is very good news.
Yeah, and the way they did it too, they it was actually written in that whenever the Kentucky Attorney General intervened in a case, his office would be the sole advocate for residential customers. So it didn't explicitly say like you can't participate, but that's what it was intended to do, right? It really specifically targeted the joint interveners, in our opinion, because let's be honest, the utilities are not always happy about our participation. We ask the hard questions and hire experts to analyze and sometimes challenge the utilities premise for things like why they need to raise rates or build a new gas plant. So, for most cases, that provision that got removed would have barred intervention, at least by the full coalition of joint interveners. And yeah, we certainly appreciate, I know Tony Curtis with Metropolitan Housing Coalition and Audrey Ernstberger with KRC testified before the Senate Natural Resources Committee, and Lane and others. Everybody really worked hard to get this language ultimately removed. So that was a big win, I think, for housing and ratepayers this year.
Yeah, sometimes a win can be what you don't allow to pass.
Yeah.
And I'll just say, I can't say enough about the work of the joint interveners. Our organization intentionally does not intervene in cases just because sometimes it allows us to get more candor from certain parties, since they don't have to worry about being sued by us. But so we're watching that work from afar, and but we really appreciate its incredibly valuable work, and that bill was going to the heart of it. So we're pretty happy with how that turned out. And it may sound like that there weren't a lot of wins this session. It makes you wonder what lawmakers did find valuable. So I'm just going to mention that um, to them, I think what they're looking at are very false solutions. One of the things that just sailed through the legislature this year and in previous years has been a focus on nuclear energy. And while even some environmentalists will say that, well, maybe we should be looking at this technology again. It's been around a long time. It's low carbon. Um, we look at the safety aspects of this. Back in the 70s, 80s, people thought they had this stuff under control, but there was a lot of false information at the time. People were learning. You've got a similar situation now where lawmakers have heard a lot of pitches about nuclear from people that are developing great technology that may make the production more streamlined or the technology is a little bit safer or compartmentalized. But the bottom line is at the same time that a lot of safety processes are being built in and new safety is being integrated, the regulations are being stripped. And so the federal government is going a long way to um, uh, take away a lot of the protections that would otherwise make it make me more confident that nuclear was being produced in a sustainable and safe way. And so our organization was appointed to one of the early nuclear committees a couple years ago. But it was pretty clear that that committee was getting a lot of happy talk, sales pitches, and I came to it with an open mind, but I came away from it believing that we haven't learned enough lessons yet about nuclear energy. And so the second round of working committees we had, I submitted instead of myself three attorneys to sit in on those committees, and they selected one, and that's our mutual friend Liz Natter, who is serving on that right now, and we have a small working group to monitor the the progress of the discussion on nuclear. But in the meantime, lawmakers easily passed Senate Bill 57, which among its provisions established a nuclear reactor site readiness pilot program. And that program has already directed, it allowed up to $25 million per project, and they've already come up with three projects so far of your taxpayer money as a start towards projects for early stage permitting for nuclear projects and allowing the utilities to seek cost recovery from ratepayers for certain nuclear development expenses. And so this is coming out of your pocket. And so we have a lot of concerns about this. It doesn't protect you if the projects never come to fruition. And, I have to say that I find it frustrating that our work to raise the issue of utility disconnections was a collective effort, multi-year, did not pass any legislation, and yet lawmakers were the one success we did have temporarily was to get the governor to put 75 million in the state budget proposal for low-income heating assistance. But that was stripped out at the end. So the governor put it in, the Senate stripped it out, and uh, and we didn't get 75 million for low income heating assistance, but we did get 75 million of your taxpayer money for three nuclear projects of some of the most expensive energy there is, the most expensive option to address our energy needs, as well as the longest development timeline. So one thing that I would certainly like people to take away from this is to um, to make sure your lawmakers are not looking at this future economic development opportunity of nuclear with rose-colored glasses, that there are real things that they need to be dealing with now on the ground. And I wanted to make that comparison so folks understood that. In the meantime, I have an open invitation to run field trips to a nuclear site, former nuclear site, if people would like to learn more about the industry in general. And I'll drop my email in the chat if anyone would like to be part of a group field trip. We could talk offline.
Thank you so much. The $75 million was definitely a shock. I know to many that were in the Leave the Heat On collective, which is the collective that was born out of trying to pass those disconnection protections. I do have a few questions for our energy speakers, but I wanted to turn it over to George, and we'll just ask all the questions together about the housing bills that we saw this session. There were quite a few, I believe, and one of them was very, very large that included multiple different bills kind of all put together. I think that was the big Senate Bill 9 that
Mhm.
included all kinds of different provisions. So I'll pass it over
Yeah,
to you, George.
yeah. Thank you, Sarah. So just so that just so you know, my name is George Eklund. I work for the Coalition for the Homeless here in Louisville, Kentucky. I know many of you all, but some I don't know. Um, where we are going, I think, is really the beginning of the journey about housing policy at the state level. We went from a space 3 or 4 years ago where maybe through one or two bills got filed about housing, and I printed all of them, and it was like maybe a half inch worth of paper that got filed. And we went to this session where we had a ton of policies and really proactive, like innovative ideas about how do we supply housing for everyone? How do we really address the affordability issue in Kentucky? And it's like a couple inches worth of paper that got used in that print job. Um, so I think our trajectory is really uh, I'm bullish about our trajectory. Um, and this really started with that housing task force that happened over the last 2 years, where lawmakers went from a space where they didn't even know what the role of the state was in housing policy to something where they were very much like proactively sponsoring bills and working them and moving them along the line. There were three bills that my organization took specific like work on trying to pass. So House Bill 333, which is the Yes in God's Backyard bill. This is a modernization, or it's really about removing red tape for churches who want to do housing or open up shelter on their property. So we passed a bill that streamlines the process for not all churches, but some churches if they hit specific requirements and parameters laid out in the legislation. And this passed the House and the Senate unanimously. Well, I think the Senate had 4 no votes, but unanimously it got passed out of the House just to say, yes, this is something that we're okay with. So that bill passed. It was sponsored by Representative Pollock. Um, House Bill 411 was a trust fund modernization bill. So we're working to increase the amount of funding that goes to the state affordable housing trust fund that builds housing for people earning less than a 60% AMI. So this is both on the home rental and the home ownership side of the issue. That bill hit a wall of opposition because realtors felt that a $24 increase to the deed recording and the mortgage recording fees was too much for them to handle. I don't think this bill is dead in the long haul. I think it's still something that we can work on over the interim and next year, just to say we are in need of units at that percent AMI. We need more units that people that are working minimum wage jobs can rent. We need first-time homebuyer options for people that are earning gainful wages, but they just don't make enough to buy a house. The thing that gives me a lot of hope is that this year was the first time that the state put money towards the trust fund in the budget. So it's a measly $5 million over the biennium, but it's still what that does is it gives us an opportunity to say, hey, you all put faith in the trust fund to put Kentucky dollars in. We can invite you in to show you the good work that they're doing. So, my hope is that providers they invite lawmakers anytime there's state trust fund money in it, to say this is the good work that we're doing in Wolf, in Powell, in Union, in Webster County, all over the state with these dollars. So that it was House Bill 411. Another bill that we really worked hard on is House Bill 338. This is about automatically expunging dismissed evictions off of people's records. Um, for those that don't know, like if you have an eviction on your rental history, it is a black mark or it's a red mark where you are really limited in your housing options because landlords will have blanket screening criteria saying if you have any eviction filed or dismissed, judgment or dismissed, you're automatically disqualified from renting that unit. So we put forth a bill that we got the courts on board with, we got the judges on board with, we got the clerks on board with, and we got the apartment association on board with. That they said, okay, if the case is dismissed, meaning a person paid up or they moved out within the time frame, and the judge said this case is done, we're dismissing it, that is automatically expunged off of a person's record in 45 days. That would have been a huge win for the almost 20,000 people that get in a case dismissed each year in Kentucky. Um, and we were able to pass that through the House unanimously. And we got it over to the Senate and it languished and it did not make it across the line. And that kind of brings me to Senate Bill 9 that Sarah was alluding to was many of you know a tactic to expedite the process and to make bills easier to pass is to assemble a Christmas tree bill. So Senate Bill 9 became the Christmas tree, and there were about 13 bills that became ornaments on that Christmas tree to expedite the process. And like I said, a lot of these bills were come from the recommendations of the Housing Task Force. So it had to do with parking lot requirements. It had to do with lot sizes. It had to do with building inspections. It had to do with expediting the process to get permitting. It had to do with um, a revolving loan fund and a way to create housing districts in Kentucky so that a utility or cities could lay all the utilities and all the water, the power, the gas lines to make sites more build ready for housing. Um, there was also provision that preempted Airbnb short-term rental regulations at a local level. All that got assembled by the House and was given to the Senate to say, hey, here's something for you to concur on. And the Senate basically said no, mostly because of the short-term rental piece. They thought it was an overreach of local control. And I think there was an element of this is too much on the last day of session. And there was back and forth, and at the end of the day, we just weren't able to get that huge Christmas tree passed this session. All that to say is like, in spite of that, the the bills that got included, the engagement that we've seen from lawmakers on this issue is really heartening. Um, Mostly because for the longest time, like my organization has been on the outside looking in and waiting and hoping that the legislature would take policies like this seriously. And so we saw a good faith effort by many members to do that this session. And our hope is to build on that for next year and the year after. Um, and as much as I wanted Senate Bill 9 to pass, like Senate Bill 9 was never going to be the end game. It was always going to be the stepping stone towards more and expansive processes. Um, and I think we can still make this a net gain for us in terms of building relationship and building capital with lawmakers to move these bills forward. So I will yield back to Sarah, and I'll answer any questions that people have about bills.
Yeah, thank you, George. I know it can be so frustrating because I know a lot of us work on these bills for many, many years, and it feels like they never go anywhere or they never get passed. My first question, which, goes for all of you is, how do you keep that momentum going when year after year so many of these bills aren't being passed? And, what can you do to hold out hope that someday it would?
So I'll just say I want to compliment the amazing work that was done by the coalitions that we were working in, the Leave the Heat On Collective, the Kentuckians for Energy and Democracy Coalition. When people raise their voices together, that may not always get a bill through. And I always caution, oddly enough, since I'm in a lobbying group, I actually try to get people not to think about going straight to the bills, but instead think about the case that you're building up and the dialogue you're making first, and making sure that you've got the public behind you and the public is aware. The the Leave the Heat On collective had rallies in the cold of winter in front of the governor's mansion, and turned out and really raised people's awareness of that particular issue with hard statistics. And the coverage we got over the course of the entire session was really well done. And so I just want to say that even though the bills didn't pass, people are much more aware now of the problem, and we may have to work on that a few more sessions before we can actually get change to happen. But sometimes things just don't happen quickly, and as much as we like to have people come out to rallies and get excited, we also don't want them to be discouraged. So you have to think of this as a long game and a short game.
Well, I'll just add, Kentucky Resources Council probably plays a whole lot more defense than offense. And so, but there are things like data center bill, some of the data center issues we worked on and others. And I agree with Lane that it's watching all of you all, show up and speak out that certainly helps keep us motivated for this work, and then the work within coalitions. But it is frustrating when we fight back and do even some, often win, well, sometimes win on certain, certain bills or issues, and then we see them pop back up. I mean, there's several that, we're worried that are going to show up again next session, and we're going to have to do it all over again. But I think, what one of the things we found was, and this is not housing related, but a lot of you all, I think, helped on this, which was that Senate Bill 89 on, water issues. And I think, which was, removing protections for groundwater, but certainly has an affordability aspect, and that I think it may increase costs for drinking water, for example, as the plants see more pollution. But I think that the momentum from that, we were able to build on this year. So when another bad like environmental policy bill came up, Senate Bill 178, we came together so much faster, and I think it really made an impact. So I see that on other work. On other issues as well with different coalitions. And I think that's just why it's so important that people keep making those calls and sending those emails.
Yeah, well, go ahead, George.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Lane and Ashley on this. Like engaging folks does give me a lot of hope and a lot of energy and motivation. My other piece is like this is really a long game, and when we talk about session, this is the playoffs. Like the real game happens between the months of May to November, where you can engage with folks and they're a little more receptive, they're a little less stressed, they're a little less overwhelmed. And, this is really like a year-round activity. It is not just a session activity. So, yeah.
Yeah, I want to echo that. A lot of people come to our door just before the session and they're upset about something. And I try to explain to them that we've actually been working on this all year, or 2 years in advance, or 3 years in advance. The most important thing that you all can do as citizens is to build a relationship with your lawmaker and then loop us in, right? So, and we're glad to accompany you to any meetings you want to have with your lawmaker. They're supposed to be working for you. They need to represent your interests, and I want to highlight that dialogue is really important. It's certainly helped me get several initiatives through when I could call up a constituent and say, "Hey, I know that you've got so and so's cell phone number and you've got a good relationship, and here's something I'd like you to mention to them," right? So that's really important. And then I also want to uh, highlight the fact that if you feel like you're disconnected from what's going on in Frankfurt, that's not totally unintentional sometimes when it comes to the power that our opposition lobbyists will have in influencing a narrative. There is a really wonderful report that's put out by the League of Women Voters Kentucky that talks about some of the ways that legislative issues are not as transparent to you as they could be. And it's a report called "How Can They Do That?" And it's really well written. It goes through all the bills of a session where, for lack of a better word, people may feel that they had dirty tricks in hiding something from you. And so I encourage you to read one of their wonderful reports on this.
Yeah, I think it's so easy to get discouraged, especially when, just the everyday person does not understand, the way that the legislative session works and the bills and what they're actually asking for. Because so many of us, are focused on, making sure we get to work, get our kids to school, make dinner, do homework, things like that. So it's really great to have organizations like you're all's fighting for us in the meanwhile, and trying to ensure that we have access to affordable and equitable policies. So, in terms of this session, what are your overall thoughts, and how do you think this is going to affect the future of housing or energy affordability? I know that's a big one.
we continue to see the legislators putting their thumb on the scale in terms of favoring one form of energy over another and not based upon affordability. And so just when we feel like, I feel like they continue to pile on with that, which is frustrating. So that's sort of one of my takeaways. And we're seeing that now, obviously, with nuclear, there's a lot of talk about affordability in terms of energy and utility costs. And I wish that the lawmakers would better understand that, from the perspective of like the policies that they are implementing, is often doing more harm than good, right? Especially thinking about bills like Senate Bill 8 and Senate Bill 349. And now we have, which just continuing to, I guess, entrench this new model of EPIC, which is the energy planning. What's that? What's the I? And
Inventory.
Yeah.
thanks, Byron. Byron's our PSC guy, attorney for KRC. That's frustrating. When we know that so many of these coal plants are, aging and uneconomic, and there are better investments that could be made. Even on things, where we saw even limits on wind turbine heights, right, which was directed at that wind project in Henderson, unfortunately. So that just will express my frustration.
Yeah, I'll just say, a lot of the power brokers on energy are deeply entrenched, and the fossil fuel industry still has a lot of power, even though it has diminished its power considerably as far as an economic development driver. They still have the connections and people with funding that can make a difference. And I hate to think that our governor or lawmakers are paying too much attention to those power brokers. And yes, wind and solar uh, interests are newer players to the landscape, but those relationships do matter. And that's why the way to counterbalance that is with your relationship with your lawmakers and then coordinate that through groups like ours.
I think my part of the issue is slightly different. It's too early to tell like what this means. I am bullish, but I'm also in charge of morale and optimist sometimes. Um, it all depends on like what actually starts moving and how they decide to address affordability. Like if it continues to be on the supply side, I think we'll see some like improvements on the issue. But if they start thinking about it on like how do we increase subsidy? How do we make it easier for people to access rental? Like, that gives me a lot of hope. I don't know. I do have hope. I think we can move in a good direction, but the jury's still out in a lot of ways.
Yes, thank you. I do have one more question before we open it up to Q&A for the audience. And this one is specifically for George, and you may be able to tell this one is from Tony. The Interim Kentucky Housing Task Force made 14 recommendations on housing issues going into the 2026 legislative session. This is a two-part question. One, how did they do filing and championing the legislation based off of these 14 recommendations? And was there any success?
Yeah, he's teeing me up so I can brag on myself. So all of those recommendations were filed, and honestly, I think the people that sponsored those bills, they were fighting for them. They were working them hard. It was not a foregone conclusion that any of that was gonna pass. The one recommendation that did pass was the one that I cared about, which was the Yes and God's backyard stuff. So out of all of those recommendations, we were the ones that were able to get one thing across the line. So that was our success rate. So the math people can tell me what one out of 14 is in a percentage, but it's less than 10%. Anyways, so yeah, I mean, that's where we're at. But a lot of these bills, this was the first, if maybe the first year that they were filed. And a lot of times you have a 3-year life cycle on bills in the best case scenario, even easy things that everyone can agree on. So I'm excited to see what comes back. I'm excited what we could tack on to improve it. knowing that we have a full year to vet them and kind of look at them and build consensus and support around them. And then hopefully we can move something during the short session in January.
I would say one passed is a huge stepping stone to what comes next. Okay, I am going to open it up for questions for the audience, and I see Wallace, you have your hand raised.
I do. I'm just curious, you guys mostly have stayed away from the partisan split in our legislature, which from this observer looks monumental. And I'm sort of curious if on like some of these homeless issues or disconnection issues on, if you're talking to a liberal representative from Louisville who says, I quite sympathize with you, but we have almost no power. This won't move unless you can get a Republican from Owensboro to work on it. And then you go to the Republican from Owensboro and they maybe won't talk to you. Would you comment on, is my imagination right? And if so, are there ways of possibly overcoming this problem?
Well, I mean, that's just the reality of the balance of power in the legislature right now. And I know it's particularly frustrating, particularly for folks in the Louisville region, which is primarily Democrat, and you've got a supermajority Republican legislature. But I, when you build a real relationship with your lawmakers, this is why I don't get discouraged, is you can always find something that connects with a lawmaker. It doesn't matter what party. I came from a very conservative political family. I assume most people would think I'm a flaming liberal now, but I can talk to all sides from that experience. And I don't like to go into it thinking uh, that I can't talk to somebody about an issue and can't sway them eventually. Now that being said, you want to have a certain strategy, and that's where organizations like ours can help you with trying to get something through. Because the disconnections bills, we tried um, just running it as a disconnections bill clearly at first, and then we realized that we may need to run it through a different committee because the Energy Committee is very much controlled by the utilities themselves. If the utilities don't like it, we know we're probably going to run into a brick wall. So then we started marketing it for the Health Committee. And I think another option would be marketing it to Families and Children's Committee or to the people that are working on disaster preparedness. Um, Eventually you might be able to find a sympathetic audience, but you have to be flexible about where you direct your energies.
I think the thing I'll add is, you know, using the relationships with the people that are already agreeing with us to socialize issues and to kind of help us identify who we should go talk to. And I think there's two strategies at play where you look at a bill like the utility bill that Wilner filed for a couple years, and then she's able to use her relationships to recruit a majority member sponsor and run a bill that way. I think the other tactic that can be helpful is, a lawmaker has a very technical small change that they like a Democrat could go on the floor and say, "Hey, like I know you have this bill. Can you make one change to it, or can you add this one thing to the budget?" Um, and it's not a bill on its own. It's no flash about it, but it is still like an effective like strategy. And so, like one example is a Democrat lawmaker in Louisville. She um, was able to get us free homeless IDs because she went to the chairman and said, "Hey, can you include this in the budget last year?" And that was a non-consequential thing, but it has a huge impact for people on the street. I mean, another example is um, there's an amendment in this year's bill around housing, I think it's in the revenue bill, where if a third-party tax lien purchaser buys your taxes, they have to now notify them 2 times a year that somebody owes money to them, not 1 year. It was like a very like small technical change, but it does like have an impact, and it's about like testing the field to see what other opportunities are out there for us to explore.
No, those are great answers. I don't really have anything else to add, but good question.
Actually, you might want to weigh in on what I just saw in the chat. Justin put in here where he's not in a place where he can turn on the mic, but what do we see as prospects for public ownership of LG&E in order to prevent profiteering from ratepayers and continued investment in fossil fuels? I think that's a good question. You might be more up to speed on the current play there.
Yeah, well, it's funny. I just dropped in the chat to Byron. Maybe you can take that one because my only answer is probably very slim, but good.
Yeah, good question.
Hey, all. I'll do my best. Byron Gary, he, him, an attorney with KRC. So this is one that I've seen come up a few times. LG&E, Louisville Gas and Electric, was originally, I believe, a municipal utility when it was founded some 100 years ago or so, and has changed hands a number of times since then through a number of different corporate structures. Is currently owned by PPL Inc., which is a Pennsylvania Power and Light originally. By their name, guessing maybe that's another public utility that went private at some point, but they own substantial stakes in Pennsylvania utilities and also in Rhode Island. And just recently notified the PSC that they are planning to actually merge with Kentucky Utilities, their sister company, also owned by PPL. The remunicipalization of LG&E is something that's been raised a few times before. I think I've seen it come up in Metro Council races here in Louisville. I will say, even prior to the merger, it was probably a slim shot. LG&E is such a large corporation at this point. It spans beyond just Louisville. Even buying just the Jefferson County operations would be a multi-billion-dollar investment on behalf of the city if they wanted to make it. And I haven't seen a huge appetite for it from city governments, other than a few mentions of it in Metro Council races, like I mentioned. The merger with KU probably makes it even less likely, although not impossible. I will say we did see this session SB 213 proposed, which wasn't aimed at LG&E. It seemed aimed elsewhere, but would have allowed for the purchase by the state of a utility, essentially to make it a cooperative. And what exactly would be involved in that? That bill didn't pass, so we don't have that clear outline of what it would take. There are other examples in history. I think it was during Dennis Kucinich as mayor of Cleveland. He remunicipalized Cleveland's utility. And I haven't followed the history well, but I know it didn't go well. I don't know if that was because of poor management or what happened, but there were some issues there. So not hugely likely, but not impossible is the TLDR, I guess, on that.
Thanks, Byron. Oh, Sarah, you're on mute.
Thank you. I was saying, thank you, Byron, so much for hopping in on that. I know we are right at time, so I just wanted to say a huge thank you to our speakers here today for representing Kentuckians and trying to keep us a more affordable and equitable state. For those who are new here, this is a program that we do once a month on the fourth Tuesday at 1 p.m. We do some type of webinar related to housing, energy, and water affordability. So we'd love to have you back. Next month in May, we will be having someone from the Union of Concerned Scientists talk to us about urban heat islands and its effect on health, households, and energy bills. So we'd love to see you there. We'll do a follow-up email after this that has a link to sign up for that. However, I think we are at time. So thank you so much again for joining us. I hope you learned something today. And it sounds like it's just pushing forward, like George said, until the end of November.